All right, Antonio, thank you for doing this. We are chatting here about a week after Grandma's Marathon. And Antonio and I have been working together for about 18 months. He's coached me through a couple marathons, a half marathon, a couple 5Ks, some random 5Ks. And so partly why I'm doing this is because I want to know kind of what happened with my race. For those of you who follow the blog, maybe know that it didn't go so great. A couple minutes, 11 minutes off of kind of my ultimate goal and about 3 minutes off of sort of my secondary goal. I finished, which is always one of the goals, so that's good. It was still my second best marathon ever. So it wasn't like it was a complete failure, but comparing how I felt at the end of this one to the end of the last one, it was like a completely different race. So, Antonio, what should I tell you about my race that will help you figure out what went wrong?
Yeah, so I mean, when I work with anyone, it's always like, okay, just walk me through
Yeah,
race day. So from the very morning you woke up to, your first mile of the race and kind of how the race progressed. And obviously I have your splits because,
right.
we've been working together on Final Surge and I can see everything.
Hmm.
But kind of
Which,
tell me a little bit more, like if I look at your splits, right, 6:58, 7 minutes, like I can see that. That only tells me half of the whole.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I think that's the first part to start is just how are you feeling,
Sure.
morning of kind of thing.
Yeah, great question. So, and maybe I'll even back up a little bit from that. So the night before, so I was traveling for this race, as most people are when they're running Grandma's Marathon. And kind of the day before, like I wasn't feeling great. Like I don't know if it was nerves. I don't know if I was fighting a little bit of a cold. I think I might have had just a little bit of a fever because I was falling asleep. My forehead felt hot.
Hmm.
Didn't sleep great the night before. We had to get up at 4 a.m. And I know that the night before isn't like the end all make or break kind of night of sleep, but I had to wake up really early. And kind of from the moment I woke up, I felt off. I was kind of choking down food. Just didn't feel great the whole way up to the starting line. I was just kind of feeling ugh. The weather kind of sucked. I take that back. The weather was actually awesome after about the third mile. But the half an hour before the race started, so we got off of we actually ended up taking the train up to the starting line. From almost exactly the moment we got out of the train to the moment the gun went off, it was just downpouring. So I started wet, cold. My shoes were soaked. I know a lot of people who had great races, and so I don't think that is, I can't just blame that, although I would like to. But then I kind of had this sort of, I don't know, this unbridled confidence is what I've been saying. The
Hmm.
weather's going to be great. I'm going to do this, even though, looking back through my, training, I hadn't necessarily hit all of the workouts exactly how I wanted to. I still felt like, all right, things can come together. But from when the gun went off, I just kind of felt off. I remember taking my first goo a little bit later than normal, but I just was like, this is gross. Like, and I normally don't have a problem taking goos and fluids and stuff, but it was just kind of like I was gagging stuff down. And so I went out, the first couple miles, I was just kind of settling in. I was only a few seconds off pace. A couple miles after that, I kind of got a little bit slower. And that was about the time. So, gosh, probably 5 miles into it, I just was like, I don't think this is the day to go sub 3. I'm going to readjust to 3:05
Hmm.
and kind of see what happens. And then, you can look at the splits. I was a little bit, I would slow down a little bit, then I would speed up and slow down. And it was almost like I couldn't quite decide if I was if I had really decided. I was kind of like in that weird like 7 flat range, which wasn't
Yeah,
really. I was like, I don't even know if that would be like a 3:02. It was like, what's the point of
right.
that?
That was not
Um,
that was not the pace we've been training for. I mean,
no,
we had two kind of goals. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And so I think I was in my back of my mind, I was still thinking, hey, I can, if I still kind of keep at least close to that, 7:52 is really the 2:59:59 goal. Maybe I can, I'll feel better later on, and things will work out, whatever. But by the halfway point, I felt miserable. Like not anything specific. So my Achilles, it wasn't bothering me at all. It was just kind of like a gut and a head thing.
Yeah.
And so right around, looking at my splits here, kind of right in that halfway point is when I kind of readjusted to like, if I can just kind of stay in that, anything below 7:10, I'll be happy. And there was a few in there. Mile 17 was a 7:20, and that was I just slowed down for some, I think it was some Powerade, and I just took it all up the nostril. And I was just like, ugh, like choking. And so I think I actually stopped for a second just to kind of like, snot rocket it out. But, and so, even mile 18 and 19, I was doing all the math. And so 3:08 was kind of the secondary goal of like, making sure we get into Boston. And so mile 17, 18, I was like, all right, if I can just maintain, a 7:15 or better, I should be fine. And then 7:20 or mile 20, the wheels just kind of fell off, and 7:36, 7:40, 7:43, 43, 57, and it was just like nothing I could do was like helping to go faster. And that's when I got some pretty severe cramping in my left calf and my right quad, which is weird. That hasn't happened to me for a couple years. And at one point, I think it was right around mile 23 or 24, I was just so miserable. I was just running these scenarios through my head of, would it be better to, fall and like skin my knee so I can like have an excuse to get a ride back? Or do I stop and walk? Or do I just kind of gut it out and just end up with whatever I end up with? Like what's, going on here? And then, have you run that course?
I've never run Grandma's at all.
So
my wife's running and all that. So.
Okay. So at mile, I think it's right around mile 25, there's this kind of sharp, like 1 block downhill, and it goes up. And going down that hill, like I had no braking ability, and I thought I was going to face plant. And then coming back up, just this uphill thing, and then there's kind of a long gradual down here from that. I was like, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can get out, a solid, 7-minute last mile here or something. And by that point, my marathon math was totally off. So I still wouldn't have hit it, but you know how you kind of start hallucinating times, whatever.
Yep.
And it was just like, I would try to speed up, and it was like my legs were just like, pulling on me, like, you're not going any faster.
Yeah.
And then, I finished, and I didn't like pass out, or I didn't keel over. I was more sore after this marathon than I think any marathon I can remember. And I actually went to get a massage a couple days after, and my massage therapist was like, your calf is just so swollen, and there was like no muscle definition. It was just like it had ballooned up. It was the same calf as my Achilles. Like I had been having that Achilles issue, and she was like, maybe it's just overcompensating, whatever. So, that all had to play, a role. I don't know what role. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, is that
that's
enough info? Too much info?
That's kind of what at least from the pacing wise. So obviously, I wasn't getting your mile by mile splits as I was tracking online, right?
Right.
But I could tell from, I think, when I saw the 10K time come in, I was like, that just doesn't seem right. And this wasn't, I didn't know the weather conditions at all. I had the forecast, but I couldn't, tell what was going on.
Right.
But I'm just like, that's just not the pace where I would think you were at. Because, we've been training, and you've always been very good about hitting your paces.
Right.
So that, instantly I was like, okay, something's just, you're not hitting the rhythm kind of thing. And I think anytime you travel for a race, and especially when you're crossing time zones, right?
Right.
It's a whole new element that you're adding to the actual marathon in itself.
Right.
So, I think that's something to have with you. And when you look at a marathon, there are going to be days when you wake up and you just don't feel it.
That's I keep telling myself.
You hope that those aren't going to be the days that you have to race the marathon, right? Like you have workouts and you wake up and you're just like, man, I am feeling terrible.
Yeah.
So, I always tell people, like, it could be just that. It could just be an off day, and unfortunately, it was the day you were racing,
right?
Type of thing. But with all that being said, to run the time you did, having your second fastest marathon, still a very solid race. So, I guess I kind of want to get back to when you were looking at your race the day before, right? Mm-hmm. And you were just feeling off. How were you feeling even that week before you started?
Yeah.
Because you traveled there on Thursday, right?
Yeah, so I traveled, I flew on Thursday, we drove up Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had just like this, Well, I think there's two things. I think that there is this this whole mental side of it, of like psyching yourself out, and I think sometimes for me that manifests it. I can't even talk. That manifests itself in like physical, like without getting graphic, like just digestive issues and just like other kind of like and like that was that week, and I think there was like I was just like there was a fear of like, can I run, that 652 because I hadn't done a great job hitting it consistently in my workouts. I'm comparing everything to what happened before. So, last year I was like, some of those longer workouts, I was like crushing those, those splits, on those, 20 miles with 15 at pace and just like, even going a little bit faster, some of them just feeling awesome. And I never felt that this whole cycle. And so in my mind, I'm like, I'm not going to do this, but Antonio thinks I can. Like I have a buddy, who's running with me, and he's like, we're pretty similar. He's a little bit faster, but I think I can do this. And so almost feeling like I was committed to this, even though in my mind, I'm like, but I can't do it. And so that whole week I was just, I was trying to be positive. I was trying to visualize everything. I was trying to like, tell everyone I'm doing this, and just kind of, kind of thinking myself into it. But I think just deep down in my gut, I was like, I don't think I can do this. And for me, I think that whisper of doubt, or maybe a little bit more than a whisper, was just like, when that gun went off, I was just like, you're done.
And to be honest with you, that's probably the biggest thing that I notice from this training cycle, Twin Cities, right? This time around, I felt like there was more time in our conversation where it was me convincing you that you could run it, and pulling up like, look, Nathan, you did it here, and you did this, and you did that. And so, why wouldn't we go after a sub 3 kind of thing?
Right, exactly.
And I think this is one of the things that is challenging with any athlete, is that when you hit your first goal, right? So whether it's complete a marathon, get your qualifier, a lot of times those are goals you can actually already do. It's like your natural ability, all that, you can do that.
Right.
The secondary goal of like, okay, I want to break 3, or I want to run, 4 minutes under my Boston qualifier. Right. Well, now we're hitting a level that you first have to believe about it, and we're making a very small gain in your fitness level to do that. And I think that a lot of times is hard for people to kind of wrap their head around a little bit. I mean, you can still do it. It's still within your wheelhouse. But with anything, first you got to believe you can do it, and then it's going to...
Right. Totally. And I think that's it. And, and there was like, I mean, just like without getting a ton of detail, just like life has been just really a lot busier this cycle. And we talked about that just like with sleep and just other stuff. And I think that all compounds upon itself. And, but yeah, that whole mental side of it is, it's tough, and then you're like disappointed, and you're like, why couldn't I run faster? And then I'm doing all those, games of like, well, what if I had run 30 seconds faster and just the last, instead of dropping all the way down to like mile 25 was 8:07. Yeah. Like, what if that was just 7:07? Like, what if everything was, 30 or 40 seconds faster? I would have, again, in that last 10K, I could have done this or whatever. And, yeah. So do you think that there's do you think maybe we made too big of a jump going from my 3:09:33 all the way down to a sub 3? Because that already was was a 10 minutes from the year before, which was 45 minutes from a couple of years before that. So,
and this was one of the things that I think we had discussed about in length kind of before we even started the training process. And the reason why I thought a sub 3, even though it was 10 minutes faster than what you had previously done,
it's a stretch.
Right. Yeah. Well, I still believe that when you were training for Twin Cities, you were probably more in like a 3:05 to 3:03 shape.
Right.
Right. And one of our things that we always had during Twin Cities, I remember distinctly being, Nathan, we should slow down on these workouts. We should slow down on this, because we had such a set goal of qualifying for Boston. Right. Right. So we just need to get that. That was our A goal, and everything after that was just a bonus. Right. So I think mentally, maybe you were thinking, okay, I'm only a 3:10 guy now. I'm trying to drop all the way down to sub 3. Right. Where in reality, you're probably actually in like a 3:05 shape at Twin Cities, and we were just conservative.
We just held back. Yeah, I've thought about that a lot too.
Yeah. So I still think you can run sub 3. I mean, I still believe
Well, thank
I
you.
put money on that for your next marathon.
Ooh, okay.
So
Do you think that, so I can't remember if I said this at the beginning, but so part of the plan that you had kind of, sort of bigger plan kind of after Twin Cities was, I was going to really ramp up my volume. So a couple of months of building, a pretty solid base, and then kind of launching, into an intense 12-week marathon specific plan from that. And I can't remember if that base was like 40 miles a week or 50, or it was pretty hefty.
mm-hmm.
But given the fact that I had that injury kind of early on, and I was looking at kind of the calendar, we really started like almost 3 months later
Yeah.
than kind of we had originally talked about. And I only had 1 week of 70 and, a handful of 60s and, a few 50s. But do you think that played a role into it, and how much, and like what, moving?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll stop there.
I think yes and no. When we look at your last training, I think we were more consistent with that higher volume.
Sure.
Right. And then we had planned on doing this higher volume because, I mean, you run more, you're going to get faster. Generally, that's the way it works with running for most people. So yes, I think that would have been beneficial to get you up, like our plan of 80.
Mm-hmm.
We even talked about 90 kind of thing a couple of times throughout the training cycle.
Yeah.
And then the Achilles thing came up, and it just made sense at the time to like, well, let's just scale it back. I mean, there's no point in trying to push on and see what happens, roll the dice. Well, is this Achilles flare up or not? So, yes and no, because I think mentally, had you gotten up to that volume that we had talked about,
Mm-hmm.
One, you would have been probably in a little better shape because you would have done that extra running.
Right.
Two, the confidence going into the marathon of like, yep, I had a 6-month training cycle, or I forget how many months it would have been, kind of thing.
I think, what would it have been? Yeah, 5. It was like
somewhere around there.
Yeah, it would have been long.
Opposed to being like, oh, we had to cut 3 months out of this because I had an Achilles issue and I just didn't know what happened,
Right.
So I think that, it takes a toll on you mentally, like you can say, it's just, it was one of those things where it's like, man, I wish I would have had those extra 3 or 4 months or whatever kind of thing.
Right.
So.
But that's not necessarily well, I guess it's hard, and when you're dissecting a race, it's hard to say, it's this one thing or it's this one thing.
Right.
It's the system, right? It's the combination of factors. And unfortunately, like what you said earlier was sometimes you just have bad days, and you unfortunately you show up and things just aren't working in your favor. I think that confidence thing is a big one. And, how do you get that is, obviously through training and through, running more. So that's why, I think it's some combination of all of the above of, doing more, maybe more miles, maybe doing, I don't want to say better workouts because they were pretty good. It's just like, yeah.
My big thing when I was training, and I had set some pretty ambitious goals, was to tell as many people what I was planning on doing.
Well, that's what I tried to do, and it didn't quite work.
Right. But I mean, it puts it out there, right? And if it's not in a cocky or arrogant way, it's
right.
It's a way to kind of build your confidence, kind of thing. And I remember I had a piece of paper taped with my goals for the year in the bathroom or the bedroom. I forget where it was, but it was somewhere where I was going to see it every day, kind of thing. And like the more I saw it, and the more kind of things I put into place like that, it was like, okay, yeah, that seems a little bit more realistic than something I'm thinking about.
Totally. Well, and did you ever have a situation where you just realized that one of your goals that you was just a little too ambitious, and that maybe, like, how do you know when it's time to reevaluate if that's even the right goal for you? Is that the $1 million question?
I guess I'm just a firm believer that there's no goal too ambitious. Like, is it a short-term goal or is it a long-term goal, right? Because sometimes goals that you set in the short term just become long-term.
That's true.
Type of thing.
But I guess if someone, and I've talked to people who have, they've been trying to qualify for Boston for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And even as they get older and the time changes, they're like, maybe they miss it by 30 seconds or whatever. Like, does there ever get a point in life where you just realize, hey, I just need to readjust?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm probably there right now, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
definitely readjusting
it's true.
my training goals and my racing goals and my
Yes.
PRs kind of thing.
You are no longer the elite 25-year-old that,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So,
okay.
I mean, yeah, I think there definitely is a time. I mean, right now for me to say I'm going to run 60 minutes for the half marathon, I mean, that's completely unrealistic
Right.
kind of thing. But to, have a goal that I've been working towards and just missed it,
Mm-hmm.
so many times. I mean, I don't know. I have a hard time saying no, we'll never be able to do something.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good perspective, because if you only set goals that you know are attainable, they're not
It's not
that.
really a goal.
No, it's not that fun. I
Right.
mean, and I think so. I have a post that I'm working on that. I've this sort of so this is my sixth marathon. I've always set a PR. I've
Hmm.
always gotten faster. I've always gotten better, and so you kind of get used to a certain
Yep.
like feeling of like, wow, this is what getting faster feels like.
Hmm.
And so for my, in the half marathon, I've kind of gone, back and forth. But so for the marathon, to not feel that, it's such a feeling of, uh, like all
Right.
that work is,
Yep.
and I've had like my first couple marathons were not fast, like they weren't what I was hoping for, but I'd still
Hmm.
like kind of gradually improving. So I think that just that mindset of, you know, it's not like a starting over, or it's just like,
Right.
okay, how do we reevaluate? How do we reassess? And the weird thing is that I actually feel more excited, more energized for the next one than I did last year,
Hmm.
because I'd kind of hit that goal, and part of it's like, well, now what do I do? Like,
Right.
I was like, well, I guess, we can try getting faster. And until we kind of, I think, fully realized like what the real Boston qualifying time is, it was like,
Hmm.
all right, so I guess I'm just going to hang out for a year and wait until I
Yeah.
see if I get in, or,
Yep.
so all that to say, like, I'm more excited for, kind of figuring out what's next, and, kind of doing some things right. So, okay, so I want to kind of like pull back from myself a little bit here, and
Hmm.
just kind of ask, like, what are some very kind of tangible things that you would suggest to someone, and maybe you can even use me as an example of, like, where do we go from here? So I've had a race. It wasn't awful. I didn't like spend half the race in a porta potty. I didn't like
Right.
have an injury. I didn't there wasn't something that really specific you can point to.
Hmm.
So what are maybe a couple tips off the top of your head that you would suggest to me that would be applicable to others as well, of like, how do you
Hmm.
figure out what's next? How do
Right.
you so my my stated goals, I still want to
Yep.
run kind of the secondary goal of 3:08 to make sure I
Hmm.
can get into Boston, but then really break 3 hours. So
Hmm.
um, since we've kind of established, okay, I still have those goals in front of me. Like, what do I
Right.
do next?
Right. So I think the first thing you want to do is, when you're looking at your races, look back at your training. I
Right.
mean, that's always step one. Were you guys consistent as you wanted to be? Did you hit all the workouts you wanted to? Was there an area that you were lacking?
Okay.
Right. That's always a big one. The next thing I always tell people is like, okay, are you excited about the marathon? Right? Do you want to run another one, or is this
Yeah.
like becoming a chore for you? Because if it's a chore,
Right.
there's other ways to run and be fit.
There's tons of other race distances.
Tons of other race distance, exactly. So I mean, that's always the next one. Is like, okay, if you're excited about it, great. Let's look at another marathon, and we'll figure it out. We'll adjust
Yeah.
your training.
And that's a hard question to answer, because in the moment I'm like, I'm never running again. I'm
Right.
like done. But
Yep.
then a couple hours later, a couple days, I'm like, all right.
Not
Start
as
looking
bad.
at calendars. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So I think that those are the two biggest things, and I always
Okay.
think it's important. It's okay to take a break from the marathon.
Right.
You don't have to run a marathon every distance or every race you do.
Right.
A lot of times,
Some
and we
people
did
do.
this. Yeah, some people do. But we did this when I forget what we did, but was it Twin Cities or something? But we just totally shifted goals, and we
Yeah.
started looking at your 5K time.
Right. Right. That was before. When was that? Yeah, that was after, like a year and a half ago, a half marathon, and we shifted to the 5K, which was a
Yeah.
great kind of stop thinking about that, do something different.
And it was, training was easier,
Oh, so easy.
and it was just a complete 180. So
Yeah.
I do that a lot with my athletes, who are just like, I don't want to run another marathon, in the near future, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's a great time to really look at the areas that you might be a little bit weaker on.
Hmm.
Right, because most people who do marathons do a lot of aerobic, a lot of long runs, slow distance, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing your 5K training.
Right.
We were doing miles, a 1 mile all out, couple 400s, really short,
Right.
kind of quick stuff that you don't really get to spend a lot of time on with the marathon.
Totally. Do you think, I hadn't really thought about that until you just said that, but so let's see, 2 marathons ago, so this was back in 2013, I'd done a half marathon, and then we did those 5Ks, and then did the marathon, whereas this was basically just 2 back-to-back marathon cycles. I mean, there was some, a few months of break in there, but how much of a factor did that maybe play into things? Like, would it have been better to throw in a couple of those other things in there, or, yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have. I always think it's important to race and to kind of throw in
Right.
distances that you weren't necessarily training for, just to see what type of shape you're in.
Sure.
And the racing mentality is not something easy that you always have.
Right.
Right? The more you race, the more kind of gritty you get.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm hurting right now, but I'm still willing to push on
Yes.
to run faster or to catch that guy in front of me.
Yeah.
When you don't have that and you don't race as much going into your marathon, or you don't do some of those shorter distance where you really kind of feel that uncomfortable burning sensation, it's hard to get that. I mean, there's very few people who can really have that kind of intensity all the time when they race or run or train or anything like that.
That's interesting, because I don't race a lot, actually. That's taking notes to myself, so that's good. Good insight. Okay. So just kind of figure out, so the areas you're weaker in, so that could be maybe some areas of speed. Are you even talking about like strength training, nutrition, sleep, some of those other things to evaluate when you think about
Absolutely.
kind of holistically everything?
Absolutely. I mean, training sometimes is the very obvious thing to look at.
Right.
But it's always like, okay, was I getting 8 hours of sleep or 7 hours of sleep every night? What's kind of like my calorie intake? Is it good food that I'm eating, or is it just something that's, quick and easy?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there's so many things you can look at. And as you know, and anyone who's run a marathon knows, it's like doing the training is a very small part of the actual part of competing.
Right. Well, and that's why it's such a big deal, right? Because the marathon is a culmination of 4 months of this extreme focus on, ideally, like you said, sleep, nutrition, strength training, the running, like your gear, all of this stuff. And then it all comes down to, 3 or 4 or 5 hours of, all right, did all that planning actually work out? And that's why when it does, it's, it makes you cry. And when it doesn't, it makes you cry in a different way. So, well, are there any other things that you kind of figuring out like what to do next that are really helpful for people for me to kind of evaluate moving forward?
So I always think the best thing to do after the marathon is just take some time off, right?
Yeah, you've always had 2 weeks of nothing, basically, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've told you the story. Like when I was, competing at a high level, after I was done with the marathon, I mean, I would do absolutely nothing. I would eat brownies for breakfast and just lay around. So it's like literally do nothing. And I think that's really the best time to kind of figure out, okay, what's my next step going to be after this marathon? Whether it went well or went terrible, I think you always get some clarity when you're sitting around doing nothing, basically.
Yeah, totally. So. No, I know that feeling. I've had, so it's been a week, and I've had Ben & Jerry's. Well, I've had ice cream every night.
Yeah.
Just a big old bowl of it, and I'm like, I don't even care.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, and I think that's helpful because there's something about that. Because like my instinct was, okay, as soon as I want to get right back into it, so maybe I'll try to get out for a couple of runs this week, and could I squeeze in a fall marathon? Could I whatever? But I think for me, that's just it's going to be rushing things, and I'm probably going to run into a lot of the same problems I had with this one, just in terms of maybe not getting the quality of workouts I want, not fully being ready to go. So, I mean, we can talk about what's next more specifically for me later, but at a different time. But no, I really appreciate that advice, and I'm definitely not doing anything for a while. I went on the elliptical yesterday for like 30 minutes and watched something on Netflix, which was great. I got a good sweat in. It's just kind of good to
do something.
Get some movement in, but otherwise just lots of walks. So, yeah. Well, thanks, Antonio. Is there anything else that, I don't know, questions for me or things that you're curious about just with my race? So like, well, what happened with this? Or just things that we haven't touched on that might be helpful for me or for, other people as they're kind of evaluating their race and evaluating, they could have done differently.
Yeah. I guess I always look back at, what was the mental aspect that maybe we could have done differently or better to really, maybe get your head around it, or anyone who's watching this, or is it's like, man, I was in the same boat. I wasn't truly believing the goal I'd set out or the pace I was trying to run, kind of thing.
Yeah. And that mental side is just it's so much more powerful than people realize, I think. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Antonio, thank you. I appreciate it. And, I think we'll kind of work on some of that mental stuff and, get in maybe some more miles down the road and kind of go from there. So thank you very much. And I will talk with you later.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.